Welcome to Histro TV. Today, we're taking you back more than 400 years to a time when brave men crossed the endless Atlantic chasing dreams of gold, glory, and a new beginning. But what awaited them was not paradise. It was struggle, disease, and death. Yet from those hardships, a nation began to rise. This is the forgotten tale of Jamestown, the first English colony in America, where courage met chaos and history itself began to take shape. So sit back and let's journey together to the dawn of a new world. It was the dawn of the 17th century. The world was changing fast. Empires were growing, explorers were mapping uncharted lands, and the hunger for power and wealth was driving nations into fierce competition. Across the Atlantic Ocean lay a vast and mysterious continent, a place Europeans called the New World. To many, it was a land of promise, riches, and adventure, but to others, it was a place of unknown dangers, where dreams could die as easily as they were born. In England, under the rule of King James I, a bold idea was taking shape. The English crown wanted to expand its influence beyond Europe, to plant its flag in the New World and claim its share of the riches that Spain had already begun to enjoy. And so, a group of investors, known as the Virginia Company of London, was formed. Their mission was clear: establish a permanent English settlement in America. In the cold winter of 1606, 3 small ships, the Susan Constant, the Goodspeed, and the Discovery, were prepared for a voyage unlike any other. On board were a little more than 100 men, adventurers, craftsmen, gentlemen, and laborers, bound together by hope, courage, and desperation. Some dreamed of gold and glory. Others saw a new life far away from the poverty and struggles of England. After months at sea, battling hunger, storms, and disease, the crew finally sighted land. It was May 1607 when they reached the shores of what we now call Virginia. The men chose a small peninsula along a wide river and named it the James River, in honor of their king. There, they began to build their settlement, Jamestown, the first English colony in North America, where courage met chaos and history itself began to take shape. At first, it seemed like the beginning of a grand adventure. The land was rich with trees and water, and the settlers imagined fields of gold waiting just beneath the soil. But reality struck soon. The swampy ground was filled with mosquitoes carrying disease. The drinking water was brackish and undrinkable. The men had little farming experience, and many refused to work, believing that treasures would appear on their own. As the weeks passed, hunger and sickness spread like fire. Supplies ran out. The heat was unbearable. The men quarreled, blaming each other for their misfortunes. And all around them, unseen eyes watched. The Powhatan Confederacy, a powerful alliance of Native American tribes led by Chief Powhatan. To the native people, these strange newcomers were trespassers, weak, confused, and uninvited. Clashes broke out. Arrows flew. Blood was spilled on both sides. Among the settlers was a man named Captain John Smith, brave, determined, and unafraid to lead. He had fought as a soldier in Europe before joining this expedition, and when chaos threatened to destroy the colony, Smith stepped forward. He brought order, discipline, and leadership to the desperate settlers. He told them plainly, "He that will not work shall not eat." With these words, he forced lazy men to build, to farm, and to cooperate. Under his command, Jamestown began to take shape. Rough wooden houses, storehouses, and palisades rose along the riverbank. John Smith also sought to make peace with the native people. He met with Chief Powhatan, attempting to trade food and learn the ways of the land. It was during one of these encounters that Smith was captured by Powhatan's warriors and brought before the chief. According to Smith's own writings, he was saved by Pocahontas, the young daughter of Chief Powhatan, who intervened and persuaded her father to spare his life. Whether legend or truth, that moment became one of the most famous stories in early American history, a symbol of fragile peace between two worlds. For a short while, that peace held. The Powhatan people provided food and guidance, and Jamestown survived its first terrible year. But survival came at a heavy cost. Out of the original 104 settlers, only a fraction remained alive by the end of the first year. Disease, starvation, and attacks had claimed the rest. Still, the dream did not die. More ships arrived from England, bringing new settlers, tools, and supplies. Jamestown grew slowly, painfully, against all odds. And with every sunrise over the James River, the English presence in the New World became stronger, a tiny spark of civilization flickering in the wilderness. The colony of Jamestown had survived its birth, but just barely. The settlers had faced disease, hunger, and conflict, and yet they remained, fragile, exhausted, but alive. It was not victory, it was endurance. And endurance was something they would need again and again in the years to come. By the year 1608, Jamestown had begun to show signs of progress. Captain John Smith continued to lead with discipline and determination. He organized the colony into work groups, forcing each man to contribute, whether building homes, gathering food, or strengthening defenses. The settlement was no longer just a dream. It was beginning to look like a village. But nature remained their greatest enemy. The Virginia climate was cruel, scorching summers and freezing winters. Mosquitoes bred in the swampy land, spreading deadly diseases like malaria. Crops failed, and the settlers relied heavily on supplies from England, which were slow to arrive. Even when ships did come, they often brought more mouths to feed than food to sustain them. Despite all this, there was a brief glimmer of hope. In 1608, Captain Smith traveled through the rivers of Virginia, exploring and mapping the region. He created one of the first detailed maps of the American coastline, a map that would guide explorers for more than a century. Smith wrote of the land's richness, its rivers teeming with fish, its forests filled with game. His reports painted a picture of promise, convincing more people in England that Virginia could indeed become a land of opportunity. But hope in Jamestown was always short-lived. In the autumn of 1609, disaster struck again. Captain Smith was injured in a gunpowder explosion and forced to return to England for treatment. Without his leadership, Jamestown fell into chaos once more. That winter, known in history as the Starving Time, became the darkest chapter in the colony's story. A bitter, merciless winter swept through Virginia. Supplies ran out completely. The settlers, trapped inside the fort, surrounded by hostile natives, had no way to hunt or gather food. They ate roots, leather, and whatever they could find. Some accounts even tell of desperate men turning to cannibalism to survive. Out of the 500 colonists who entered that winter, barely 60 survived to see the spring. When new settlers arrived from England in 1610, they found a ghost town filled with despair and death. The survivors were ready to abandon the colony and return home. But fate had other plans. As the ships prepared to leave, a new governor, Lord Delaware, arrived from England with fresh supplies, more settlers, and a message from the king. Jamestown must not be abandoned. And so, the settlers stayed. The dream of a permanent English presence in America was reborn. Under new leadership, the colony began to rebuild once again. Strong laws were enforced, farms were planted, the fort was repaired, and most importantly, new settlers began to arrive with one purpose: not to find gold, but to build a life. It was during these years that a man named John Rolfe changed the destiny of Jamestown forever. Rolfe experimented with planting tobacco, a crop that was popular in Europe but difficult to grow. After several failed attempts, he succeeded in cultivating a sweet variety that quickly became the colony's first major export. Tobacco became the lifeblood of Virginia, the crop that would turn the struggling settlement into a thriving economy. With every harvest, wealth flowed back to England, and more settlers followed, eager to share in the new prosperity. Large plantations began to appear along the James River, and the demand for labor grew. This marked the beginning of another chapter, one that would later shape America's moral struggles: the introduction of African laborers to Virginia in 1619, the first arrival of enslaved people in English America. Though at first few in number, their presence would eventually leave an unerasable mark on the nation's history. But before that future unfolded, Jamestown still had stories of peace and love. In 1614, John Rolfe married Pocahontas, the daughter of Chief Powhatan. Their marriage brought a temporary peace between the English settlers and the native tribes. For the first time, there was trust, trade, and cooperation. The colony began to flourish. Houses multiplied, new farms appeared, and hope replaced despair. To many, this seemed like the dawn of a lasting friendship between two worlds. Pocahontas even traveled to England, where she was received as a symbol of the New World and proof that civilization could be shared. But destiny was cruel. Pocahontas fell ill in England and died at a young age, far from her homeland. Her death marked the end of that brief harmony. Still, Jamestown stood strong. It had survived famine, war, and disease. It had lost hundreds of lives, but gained something greater: permanence. Against all odds, the English had built a lasting settlement in the New World, and from that fragile outpost, a new civilization was beginning to rise. The age of exploration was over. The age of colonization had begun. While the colony of Jamestown was slowly growing in the South, another story, quieter yet deeply spiritual, was beginning to unfold in the North. It was not driven by the hunger for gold or power, but something even stronger: the longing for freedom. In early 17th century England, religion was not just a matter of faith, it was a matter of law. The Church of England, under the authority of the king, allowed no independence, no difference of belief. Those who dared to question its authority faced imprisonment, exile, or death. Among those who resisted were a small group of English Protestants known as the Separatists. They believed that true faith required freedom from the established church, a direct relationship between the individual and God. For their beliefs, they were hunted, fined, and forced into hiding. Many fled to the Netherlands, seeking safety and tolerance. But life there was hard. They lived in poverty, far from their homeland, and feared that their children were losing their English identity. And so they made a bold decision: to leave Europe entirely, to sail across the Atlantic Ocean and build a new life in the wilderness of America, where they could worship freely and live according to their faith. They were not soldiers or explorers. They were simple men and women, farmers, craftsmen, families. They called themselves pilgrims, for they were travelers on a journey of faith. In September 1620, a small ship named the Mayflower left the port of Plymouth, England. Aboard were 102 passengers, men, women, and children, and a crew of sailors. They were joined by a few others seeking fortune, but most were driven by faith and hope. They carried little more than tools, seeds, Bibles, and dreams. The voyage across the Atlantic was long and brutal. Storms battered the ship for weeks. Waves crashed over the deck, and sickness spread among the passengers. The air below deck was foul and suffocating. They prayed every day, clinging to the belief that God would guide them to a new home. After 66 days at sea, on November 9th, 1620, they finally sighted land. But it was not Virginia, their intended destination. The storms had blown them far north to the rocky shores of what we now call Massachusetts. Cold winds swept over the barren coastline, and winter was fast approaching. Realizing they had landed outside the official territory of the Virginia Company, the Pilgrims decided to govern themselves. Before stepping onto the new land, they gathered inside the ship and wrote a simple but historic agreement, the Mayflower Compact. In it, they promised to form a civil body politic, to make laws, and to live together in peace for the good of all. It was a humble beginning, but that single document became the first foundation of self-government in what would one day be the United States of America. On December 21st, 1620, the Pilgrims set foot on land at a place they named Plymouth, after the English port they had left behind. They built small wooden shelters near the coast, but the winter was harsh beyond imagination. Snow fell endlessly, food was scarce, and disease spread quickly through the tiny settlement. By the time spring arrived, nearly half of the Pilgrims had died. Mothers buried children, husbands buried wives, and yet they did not lose faith. But as fate faded, hope appeared in an unexpected form. One morning, a tall Native American man walked into the settlement and greeted them in English. His name was Samoset. He had learned some English from fishermen along the coast and soon introduced the Pilgrims to another man, Tisquanto, whom they called Squanto. Squanto's story was one of tragedy and fate. Years earlier, he had been captured by English explorers, taken across the ocean, and sold as a slave. He eventually escaped, returned to his homeland, only to find his entire tribe wiped out by disease. Now he stood among the newcomers as a bridge between two worlds. Squanto taught the Pilgrims how to survive in this new land. He showed them how to plant corn in the sandy soil by using fish as fertilizer, how to catch eels and lobsters, and how to find edible plants in the forests. With his help, the Pilgrims built stronger homes, learned to trade, and made peace with the nearby Wampanoag tribe, whose leader, Massasoit, agreed to an alliance of friendship and protection. Through that spring and summer, the settlers worked tirelessly. They cleared the land, planted crops, and built fences and houses. By autumn, their harvest was plentiful. Corn, beans, and vegetables filled their storehouses. For the first time since their arrival, there was food, safety, and peace. In gratitude, the Pilgrims decided to hold a feast, not just to celebrate their harvest, but to give thanks to God for their survival. They invited Massasoit and his people to join them. For 3 days, the English and the Wampanoag shared food, games, and friendship. There was roasted meat, corn pudding, fish, and fruits. Drums echoed through the woods, laughter filled the air, and for a brief moment, two worlds, the old and the new came together in harmony. This celebration would later be remembered as the first Thanksgiving, a moment of gratitude born from struggle, faith, and unity. But history, as always, would grow more complex. In the years to come, as more settlers arrived, peace with the natives would crumble. Conflicts would rise again, and the expansion of colonies would forever change the land. Yet that first gathering at Plymouth remained a symbol, a reminder of courage, hope, and endurance. From the hunger of Jamestown to the prayers of Plymouth, a new chapter of humanity had begun. The seeds of a nation were sown, not yet a United States, not yet an empire, but a fragile dream of freedom and faith planted by the hands of ordinary men and women who dared to believe in a new world. Their story marked the dawn of America, a beginning that would echo through the centuries. And so, under the cold skies of 1620, as the Pilgrims raised their eyes to the stars above the Atlantic, the New World truly awoke, and the story of a nation began. And so the story of Jamestown became the first chapter in America's long and turbulent history. From hunger to hope, from chaos to creation, these early settlers laid the foundation of a nation that would one day change the world. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Histro TV.